Hello, my name is Judith Shatin, and I'm so pleased to be here and to participate in the Composers Now Impact series, giving a peek into the compositional process of so many different composers. As a composer, I'm really fascinated by sonic exploration, and collaboration is also central to my work. I started out playing piano and flute as a child, but along the way I became really fascinated also by electronic music. And frequently people ask me how I got into it, and it's really hard for me to remember. But a couple of years ago, composer Seth Cluett sent me a letter that he had found at Columbia University's archive. And in it, in a letter from me during my junior year in 1966 in high school, I asked whether there was an internship or a course or a job because I was fascinated by electronic music. Now in 1966, as you might imagine, there wasn't much. So fast forward 21 years, and I founded the Virginia Center for Computer Music at the University of Virginia. That was really a fascinating experience because although as a graduate student at Princeton, I had studied computer music, it was still in its infancy. And when I founded the Virginia Center for Computer Music, I didn't really know much. So I went to New York, parked myself at a store selling equipment, learned enough to write a grant proposal, which was funded, and never looked back. And today I still love doing music both for acoustic and digital media, and I'll be talking about both of those today. As I was planning my examples, I realized that all of them have something to do with conflict, some of them war. And it seems, given this situation we face today in so many different domains, that this feels appropriate. The first piece is called Gregor's Dream, and it is scored for amplified piano trio and electronics. Now, before I go into detail about the piece, I'm happy to mention that the Capo Chamber Players will be presenting it on their program at Merkin Hall on May 10th at 8 p.m. as part of their 50th anniversary series, and this one is focusing in particular on bridging styles, and my piece represents combining chamber music and electronics. Gregor's Dream was commissioned by the Jerusalem-based Atar Piano Trio for a program called Dream Within a Dream. And when I heard that title, what immediately leapt to my mind is the moment where Gregor Samsa in Kafka's Metamorphosis wakes up to find himself transformed into a terrible bug. I think that that story is, in a sense, a predictive one, written during 1915, after the start of World War I, the story which focuses on the transformation of Gregor into a bug and his treatment, his terrible treatment by his family, as though now he's become some disgusting other, even though, of course, he's still part of the family. Unfortunately, that became predictive not only of World War II, but of what we see so often today, forgetting that we are all members of the same family. Now, in this scoring, I thought of the bug as perhaps being a beetle. There are over 400,000 different species of beetles. And to create the electronic, I contacted some people researching beetles, and they kindly shared some sounds with me that I transformed in the course of working on this piece. I'm going to start, however, by showing an example of how I worked to explore the piano to come up with a way of demonstrating the sounds that a piano could make that are reminiscent of those of the beetle. One of the things I always am interested in doing in my music for combinations of chamber, ensemble, or voice and electronic is finding ways to make connections between them. So I'm going to show you how I found a way to use the stick of a mallet on the pegs of the piano in order to make that sound. I wanted to show you how I explored the sounds of the piano that I thought might match those of the Beatles. And so I took the stick of my mallet and just tapped the tops of the pegs, and they make a kind of clicking sound, very similar to those that you will hear the Beatles do in some of the places in the piece. One of the things that I find so fascinating in composing a piece like Gregor's Dream is that the electronics offer such huge opportunities for transformation. So you will notice, as I play the example of the opening of this piece, that it starts out with a deep, ominous rumble. But even this sound was made by processing those recordings of the Beatles. So there's this kind of continuum of transformation that exists in no other way, where you can hear the sound source and you can find transformations where you would never be able to infer from that transformation what the original is. The other aspect that I'd like to mention about this that is so fascinating to me is what happens in the composing process. I really find myself in what Csikszentmihalyi would call a sense of flow. That is, time kind of drops away, hours can go by, and I'm not really aware of them. It really becomes a kind of situation where imagination and thought merge together, and it's a wonderful sensation to have that. In fact, I think it's what draws so many of us to the transformational power of music. So I'm now going to give this example of the opening of Gregor's Dream, and you will hear how, just as the ominous rumble of the electronics of the opening sounds, the instruments used plucked sounds to make their response to it. And those plucked sounds are also related to the kinds of sounds you will hear in the Beatles. The next piece I'm going to talk about is called Ice Becomes Water. And this one is certainly a response to the disaster of climate change and the melting of glaciers. It was commissioned by the San Jose Chamber Orchestra, and the sound source for the electronics came from field recordings shared by the glaciologist Oskar Glauvatsky. And these are collected by microphones that are underwater as he studies the acoustic signatures of glaciers as they change. So this is scored, as I mentioned, for string orchestra and electronics. And again, I was very interested in having a kind of interaction between the instruments and the electronics. This involved a lot of collaborations with string players to explore the huge world of sound in addition to the traditional kinds of sounds that those instruments make. So there's a sense in which this piece is both suggestive of the kind of breaking up and melting of the ice, but also a lament for them. The performance that you will hear is by the River Oaks Chamber Orchestra, conducted by Mei Ann Chen. And again, it features a part of the piece where you will hear what's quite clearly the sounds of glaciers in collaboration with the strings, and then also places where the source of the materials would be very hard to guess. The next piece I'm going to discuss is called Respecting the First Parens Amendment. It was commissioned by the San Jose Chamber Orchestra and is scored for string orchestra and electronics made from readings of and about the First Amendment. There has been so much debate about the First Amendment, and I became particularly concerned about this at the time of all of the debate surrounding the Affordable Care Act. And the current piece is, in effect, a cousin of an earlier piece that I wrote called Respecting the First for Amplified String Quartet and Electronics, commissioned by the Cassatt Quartet through the Fromm Foundation. In both of them, I'm very concerned about the issues of freedom, of religion, of press, of speech, and the right to assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. In the new piece, the electronics have been changed quite a bit, as have a number of the string orchestra passages. And I was very concerned to make sure that multiple voices were represented. My own is in the opening of the piece, the first reading of the amendment, but it includes many others, broken up by different voices, and also a recording of Gabby Giffords reading the amendment on the floor of the House just prior to the terrible shooting she and others endured when she was trying to peaceably meet with her constituents. This amendment is so crucial to what our democracy stands for, and yet the question does come up, are there any limits on free speech? Are there any limits on what we should be allowed to say that are protected? And of course, I can only begin to imagine the lack of understanding that the founders would have had at the idea that a corporation has the right to speech. So I'm going to play you an example in which you will hear both some of the electronics as well as the string orchestra in respecting the First Amendment. This piece has been shown online for 2 different periods of 1 month, and we look forward to its live premiere in the coming seasons when it will be performed by the San Jose Chamber Orchestra, and we hope by others as well. I have found that although I still compose music that does not have any external stimulus such as this, I am more and more moved to create music that speaks to issues of our time, speaks to issues that we are all wrangling with, and responds to the world around us, sometimes in ways that are really kind of fun. For instance, one of my recent pieces is called Zipper Music, and it is part of a series called Quotidian Music, Music of the Daily. And this piece is for amplified zipper players. Yes, they play with whatever jacket they happen to have, and interactive electronics. But one of the things I loved about doing this series is not only paying attention to the marvelous sounds of the inventions of the built world and also the natural world around us, but also how these can be performed by players who don't necessarily have musical training. Because to me, the joy of music performance should be accessible to all of us, whether we have that kind of training or not. I also, of course, love composing for performers who do have that background and for whom I can really explore upper reaches of technical virtuosity. But I love working with the entire range. In respecting the First Amendment, believe me, there are many places where the upper range is indeed required.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble.
or the right of the petition
the
the
right
government
of the
to
people
suffrage, and to petition the government for redress, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for the right of redress, or the right of the to assemble, or the right of and to petition the government for redress.
The next example comes from a song cycle I did called Weiter and Weiter, which is Yiddish, and it means farther and farther. I'm going to play for you the second of the songs. It is called Deine Spielzeug, meaning your toys. It is a setting of poetry in the original Yiddish by Avram Sutzkever, who was a Holocaust survivor, a partisan, who eventually settled in Tel Aviv. And although he first wrote in Hebrew, he then switched to Yiddish, even though there was quite a bit of pushback once he had moved to Israel, that he should be writing in Hebrew rather than Yiddish. However, he wanted to do what he could to keep that language alive. My paternal grandparents, who lived in Brooklyn, had Yiddish as their first language, and that is the language my father first learned. So I wanted, in my small, modest way, to contribute to keeping this language alive. I'm going to read you a translation of Deine Spielzeug by the distinguished American poet Hannah Block. It goes like this. My daughter, you must care for your toys, poor things, they're even smaller than you. Every night when the fire goes to sleep, cover them with the stars of the tree. Let the golden pony graze the cloudy sweetness of the field. Lace up the little boy's boots when the sea eagle blows cold. Tie a straw hat on your doll and put a bell in her hand, for not one of them has a mother, and they all call out to God. Love them, your little princesses. I remember a cursed night when there were dolls in all 7 streets and not one child. Of course, as I read this, I have to think about what is going on in the Ukraine right now, but also what's been going on in Syria, Yemen, Ethiopia, and so many other places. So I really felt compelled to share this with you today.
Deine Spielzeug, mein Kind, haltet Eile. Deine Spielzeug, noch kleiner wie du.
The last example I'm going to play for you is a choral piece called Adonai Ro'i, a setting of Psalm 23 in the original Hebrew. I composed this right in the aftermath of the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Unlike the other pieces thus far, it does not deal with conflict or war or some of the other existential threats facing us, but rather with comfort. Before I play it, I want to mention that most of the pieces that I'm describing today are available to listen to in full online, and the Capo Chamber Players performance coming right up on May 10th will also be live streamed. So now to Adonai Ro'i in a performance by the University of Virginia University Singers, conducted by my colleague, Michael Slon, whom I've had the pleasure of working with on numerous occasions during my career as a professor of composition and computer music at the University of Virginia. Thank you so much for joining me.
Dear